We're going to hear from Rocky Scopelliti, the Global Industry Executive, Banking and Finance Insurance Global Industries at Telstra, really Telstra's thought leader in the digital landscape, and we're very pleased that he could come along today and share his expertise. So he is going to present for 10 minutes and then come and sit down to talk with, as you see on the screen, Chuck Lyman, a partner at PwC, and Amanda Gome, who's a founder of Notable Media. And in the course of that discussion that follows, I'd love to see as many questions as you might like to pose on the screen. You could see this as a free consultation with some industry experts if you wanted to. Ask a very specific question, a general one, whatever you like, and we will try to get to all of your questions. So please make Rocky very welcome to start.
Thank you, Ellen. Well, good morning and welcome. It's a pleasure to spend this next 50 minutes with you and my colleagues to talk about a topic that is very, very dear to my heart and that of yours as well. The first thought I'm going to begin with in this discussion over the next 10 minutes is about disruption. It's a word that no doubt is synonymous now with digital, and it's a word that you'll hear a lot about. The thought that I want to put in your minds is that disruption occurs when two significant or more events occur, and disruption in the financial services industry is occurring because of two significant events. The first is significant demographic change that's unfolding. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The second is technological change, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about that. So let me begin by just sort of talking about demographic change. The reason why this is so important to the financial services sector is for three key reasons, and that is that when it comes to generations Y or millennials, that is those that are broadly aged between about 18 and 35, those people today make up our workforces and will increasingly make up our workforces looking forward. By 2020, which is just there, they're going to make up 1 in 2 people in the workforce. These are the people that are going to be earning the income. The second most important reason of why that demographic is important is because they're the demographic that is spending the income. They're spending 5 times more money than what we were spending when we were their age. The third most important reason of why that demographic is important is because of intergenerational wealth transfer. Today, generations X and Y make up about 36% of national wealth, and through the course of time, that's going to increase to 70% of national wealth. And the one assumption we can't make is when that money moves, so will the legacy relationships associated with that wealth. It just doesn't happen that way. The second area that I want to talk about is a little bit about technology. Now here, in 2014, we crossed over into a very, very significant inflection point in the financial services sector. For the first time in 18 of the 22 countries that I looked at, the mobile device has now become the primary device upon which people are accessing financial services. People have chosen the smartphone to be the connection between their physical life and their digital life. And in a mobile-first financial services world, we've got to think about digitally completely different. It's a mobile digital world that we've got to think about. Now, in that context, we also need to remind ourselves of the impact of cybercrime. Cybercrime is affecting people like never before on alarming sets of numbers. Here in Australia, 1 in 3 people have been impacted by identity theft. What's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is that 40% of those people believe it's the institution's fault. 65% of those people are likely to leave the institution as a result of that. The one thing that financial institutions have in spades over any other organisational type is trust. But here's the thing, trust is perishable. And with the incidence of identity theft impacting people worldwide, we need to think about cybercrime and security in a completely different light when it comes to digital. The third area that I want to talk about is that in a mobile-first financial services world, we have the opportunity to completely rethink the experiences that people will want through that device. It's not the same as what people expect through an online or through a computer-based experience. That device, as I mentioned before, is the device that we have chosen to make the connection between our physical world and our digital world. And the three things that people want when it comes to financial services through that device are convenience. Now, convenience isn't just a function of just opening up the app and there it is. People want personalisation. This is about them and their relationship with you. It has nothing to do with, being treated as just sort of one of the norms. And convenience is something that these generations will not tolerate as generations before them. I was talking to my colleagues about this before we kicked off. Why is it that we tolerate standing in queues? Why is that? It's not a pleasant experience. It can't be for enjoyment. We do it because we have to do it, but we tolerate it. And we're now up against generations who don't need to tolerate that anymore, because they can say goodbye to you by just closing that app, and they can say hello to somebody else by just opening up that app. And so we've got to think about personalisation very, very importantly when we think about what people want as a result of personalisation and customisation and applications. Now, the next area that I just want to sort of touch on is about content and media. And Amanda will share lots of her great experiences on this in the discussion. But financial institutions have to increasingly become media and publishing-based capabilities within their organisations. This is very, very important in terms of thinking about how to communicate, how to create experiences that people value. We sort of saw in that first question, which was a terrific question about engagement and the lack of engagement. Well, the way people expect to consume services and information has profoundly changed. And if we just look at what happened to the media industry as an industry, probably one of the first that was digitally disrupted, it's because today you can select what content you want, from what source you want, in what form you want, at what time of day you want, through the device that you want. The way we consume media has profoundly changed. And there is a blurring now between what we want in terms of lifestyle services and financial services. In some research that I'm doing at the moment around millennials, those two things are fused. What people expect in terms of the way with which they want to live their lives and the role that finance plays in that is inextricably linked. And so we need to think very, very carefully about shifting away from just online and digital being about transactional-based activity. It's much, much more than that. It's about engagement, and engagement is about content. And we'll have a big discussion on that as we get into the conversation. So look, in just sort of summarising, I'm just going to sort of start by saying the one thing that you have that fintechs don't have is trust. And trust to generations X and Y means four things: trust to keep my finances secure, trust to keep my personal information secure, trust to keep private the interactions I have with your organisation, and then lastly, the reputation of your organisation when it comes to security, identity and authentication-based services. In a mobile-first financial services world, we have the opportunity to shift the trust paradigm away from making people prove who they are to you using conventions such as user ID and password, which are inherently flawed, onto technologies that recognise them for who they are. Now, what people want in a mobile experience with their financial institution is convenience, personalisation and customisation. Those are the three key aspects of the experience that they're looking for. So I hope this has helped sort of open up your minds to the discussion around digital, and I look forward to extending this conversation with my colleagues. Thank you.
Terrific. I know that Amanda and Rocky will be bursting, ready to react to parts of that. Shall we start with Amanda?
Yes, so Rocky, fantastic. I'd just add to that last point also recognition. I think customers and clients also want to be recognised, and that's a very powerful...
As in, it's you, Ellen, or as opposed to, oh, there you are, 13187620.
You've actually come back to us via digital. Hello, we know you've been here before. That is such a simple way, but some kind of recognition of, and this of course is what digital is so powerful at doing, and then you can do also that through personalised content as well. And just one other point I wanted to make, Rocky, we talked about the millennials, but if you look at flexibility, mobility, content, they also apply to all the generations, and the assumption that it's the young people and we've got to get ready for them coming through, it also extends right across the generations, and the biggest growth on some social media networks are people over 55.
Okay. Chuck?
Thanks. And great points and well made by both Rocky and Amanda. I think the build that I would have on it is that when you look at those trends, you look at the demographic shifts, you look at the technological shifts, and what we're able to deliver in terms of uplifts to member experience, the question often comes then to, how do we do that? What is the journey that we take to get there? And this is a point that I work with funds on quite a bit, and the questions often come down to, okay, so in all that context, what then should our target state be? What should we plan to deploy against all those initiatives? And often that ends up with a fairly hefty price tag. And so you get quickly into the economics discussion about how can we make this fit within an industry with a backdrop that there's lots of pressure and sort of outside scrutiny on how cost levels are changing, how we're being globally competitive with leveraging the scale of our superannuation industry, and fitting into that this essentially growing investment profile that we're going to need to put in to first our core architectures to get the data right and all the core systems right, but then on top of that, our target state digital experiences. So this is one of the tensions I think that comes from the rapidly changing world that we're all seeing, and I think Rocky and Amanda put very nicely. And then the question is, how do we actually execute it against that in a world of constraints where we have to make progress against our scale and cost objectives and get to our member experience that we'd like to.
And to what extent does it become difficult to define what sort of member experience people want? I mean, I've just opened up my pitiful NAB bank account here, and they have a pie chart, which I won't show you, it's embarrassing. And it shows that I've spent 20% of income since January on my teeth. I know. Why is there pie chart there? Is that convenience, personalisation, customisation and recognition? Because if it is, it's not floating my boat.
But you have to be very careful with personalisation because it can actually alienate the customer, and we're really at the cusp of it even beginning, you know.
Yeah, I think that you're starting to now see some really, really exciting generations or groups of people that actually do get it, and they're labelled fintech or financial services technology startups. Now,
and what are they getting? Because you're implying that the trusted traditional brands perhaps are a little slower to get. What are they getting?
So they're certainly investing significantly in around a whole range of personal financial management tools, for example, that make it easier to save, spend, borrow and invest. And what's interesting, I'll use one example of a person who might be familiar to some of you. His name's Brett King. He's an Australian who is a wonderful thought leader and has done remarkable things. And he set up a neobank in New York, one of the most highly competitive retail banks in the banking markets in the world. Now, if you look at the philosophy of what Moven is essentially about,
and that's the name of his bank, if you will, is Moven.
Moven. If you look at the philosophy of it, it's all about enabling people to achieve their life goals with finance. And so they've developed this sort of algorithm that is connected to all of your financial affairs, and this algorithm's going up and down according to your behaviour, but it's giving you advice, digital advice, in terms of being able to manage whatever goals you set for yourself. So through the app, you can sort of set your goals on what you want to do and achieve over what periods of time, and this thing's guiding you. And I think that's what's different about when you look at those kinds of applications compared to the ones that are perhaps coming through. The ones that are coming through at the moment are very broadcast, they're very descriptive, they're very specific, and you have to do the interpretation of what it means.
Yeah, it's just raw data telling me at half speed what I already know, and there's no why, and therefore what doesn't come through. All right, there's some questions on the screen. When tech moves so fast, i.e. the iPhone being less than 10 years old, how best to be intuitive to new tech rather than just reactive? This is what it can do today. Let's build something that will be ready in 2 years to do what we can do today.
I think this gets to kind of the capability question or the cultural question of what we need to do to change to essentially be responsive and get ahead of the digital curve. And so when you think about sort of that question of what it means, I referenced before, a lot of funds are thinking about what's our target state. And I think that's an important question of where are we trying to get to, what's our member experience. But I think equally as important is how are we creating the culture of innovation, the culture of, let's say, sensing the market, understanding what's happening, the culture of test and learn that we see in digital startups, the sense of what it means to get digital capabilities in a digital team, and that is, in essence, closing the loop with data on a continual basis, right? Saying, what are we doing? How is that resonating with our members? And then what are we learning from that data to actually update our value proposition? So in some sense, what I'm saying is that, and there was another question about digital being a fancy name for IT, I think linking those things together, essentially, my view would be that the days of sort of monolithic, future-looking, 5 years out IT, we can sort of put behind us, right? We need to think more about a reactive, responsive, market sensing capability that instead of trying to, and we should try to put a flag on the hill for 3 years out, but we should be continually testing the market and data and what's happening with our value proposition to modify that.
And I think, Amanda, most people in this room fully understand that what digital means is not just putting pieces of paper online. They've got that. So what do you see as the tension to developing the sort of nirvana of something that is personalised, customised, mobile first, that puts me at the centre, rather than having me respond to my superannuation fund?
Look, I think one of the most important things is actually, and I think we'd all agree on this, are the leaders going on this journey. And these journeys are very difficult to take if you haven't got your CEO pretty much setting a goal out there, and then the senior leadership buying into that. And a very, to your point, Chuck, about culture change, one very easy way to do that is to take the culture social and to get the CEO on social media, get the executives on social media, and all your employees on social media. And that opens up a whole cultural shift in mindset that then lends itself to digital becoming very much a daily thought. How do we do this in a digital way? To the point where you don't even think about it anymore being digital. It is just part of how you work. So, and at the start it's a new way of working, but then it just becomes the way of working.
Rocky?
Yeah, look, I think you are now living in a world of constant change. Every day there is something new that is going on, and the pace of that change is what a lot of organisations, including our own, struggle with, because this is about trying to keep up with the pace of change. And so the best way to set yourself up for success is to set your organisations up in such a way that you can adapt, change, be flexible, be agile, have a culture that invites entrepreneurship, innovation, creative thinking, so that when opportunities do come up, when changes in behaviour, technologies and the like do occur, your organisation can respond according to the requirements of your members or your customers. And I think when that gets out of equilibrium, that's when new entrants or startups are invited into play, because they can provide customers with something that perhaps your organisations can't.
And to what extent is this a conversation about who's on the board and whether they get it?
So my view on I think it's on broadly leadership of the funds or institutions. If you think more broadly about how financial services is reacting to this, my view isn't that we need to change the people. I think it's a time of learning and a time of, I think, vulnerability within funds as people think about what new skills do I need to learn, what new questions do I need to ask as we embark on a digital transformation journey? Where do I need, as a board member, where do I need to sort of poke at this process to interrogate and make sure I feel comfortable with the risk level?
What questions do I need to ask?
Yeah, exactly. And then the learning part goes to what a lot of funds are doing, which is saying, okay, it's not enough just to read articles and go to conferences and those sorts of things. We actually need to go and see what disruptors are doing, see what they're thinking. And so you see a lot of funds and executives thinking about, okay, we're going to go over to the Valley, we're actually going to talk to a venture capitalist, we're going to go see some startups and understand the culture in a more real way, and I think that's helpful. As an example, we brought a venture capitalist down from the Valley and had a session last week and said, okay, well, are you going to be disrupted? Well, here's someone who's on point for making calls every day on where to deploy capital to disruptive companies, and here's how they think about it. And I think one of the things that comes up there is that, and it kind of goes to the design your target state or react to the market debate.
Yeah.
The venture capitalist view is, I don't really care that much about the idea. I care about a big market, and I care about the team. And if I get those two things right, then the team will figure it out to pivot the idea and chase the right creation of value. Which I think is an important lesson for how we think about building our team.
And to your point, yes, the boards, they're very good at seeing how, demographic shifts and economic shifts, and being able to also understand how the company needs to change. But they do need to really understand the urgency, I think, of this change. And I was just reading the other day, someone said, it's going to take a whole generation. We really, generation of for this current board members to kind of wash through before we really get digital, and that absolutely, I think you both disagreed with that, but that can't happen. But there is no reason that board directors and CEOs can't get on board, and they've got all the tools to understand this. I think part of the problem is psychology as well. It's scary. But knowing that they can grasp it and lead this quite easily is quite empowering for them. And we're starting to see a number of them doing that.
I probably have a sort of somewhat different view, but also a biased view. In my view, I don't think there's enough technology expertise on the boards of most organisations in our country. And I think that falls within the same narrative around board diversity. I don't think you can sort of separate that out. The reality is that technology will play an increasingly important role in all organisations going ahead, not less. And I think we can't just expect that a board of directors is going to, through the course of a couple of study tours or reading a couple of magazines, are going to become computer engineers overnight, because they just the best performing boards, irrespective of what industry sector, are the boards that have the best diversity of skills that aids the decision making of those organisations. And I think we're now in a point of time that we're now recognising that as part of the diversity conversation, that there's perhaps a shortage of directors that have very, very deep technological skills in Australia.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with you there. I think
Yeah.
that's absolutely right.
But not all of them. You know, they don't all
No,
have to be
no.
techno. Yeah.
No,
I think your point about getting one or two people in that can be the referees against,
Yeah.
I've been through these processes
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
is very, very helpful and serves as a sort of honesty check about
Yeah.
what's happening.
There's a question on the screen, a good provocative question. If funds aren't prepared to spend on digital transformation, should they be rethinking their existence?
I'll have a go at having a response to that. I think your members and your customers are going to make that decision for you, because you're in a battle for relevancy, and in a world where the regulators are going to increasingly reduce the barriers for members to move, and again up against demographic change, they will vote with their money, they will vote with their feet, and they'll go elsewhere. You're now up against a demographic who today makes up 1 in 3 in the workforce. This is your millennials. And in the next 4 years, they're going to be 1 in 2 people in the workforce. They're going to have 7 career shifts in their life. That's career shifts, that's not employment shifts.
Wow.
Every time a shift occurs, it is a question in terms of whether they should stay or whether they should go. And that's going to be based on the experience and their reference point of what they have with you today. And if that doesn't sort of, fall within their expectation, they'll vote with their money and they'll move.
Amanda, there's an interesting question here about, just coming off what Rocky said there, the need for a growing relationship between the Chief Marketing Officer and the Chief Technology or the CIO. Speak to that.
Yes, well, it's quite interesting. You traditionally have had your marketing and your comms and your technology, and pretty much they haven't talked much. And now overseas, you're actually starting to see these functions merge into, you'll have a digital comms and marketing group, and they're all kind of one, working together. That hasn't quite come here yet. But anyone in these functions needs to understand we're in this whole new collaborative world, and they've got to work really side by side together. And of course, you've now got marvellous collaborative tools. Internally and externally, you can all work socially and do that. So that's part of the whole culture change that Chuck was alluding to. It's got to be a completely new way of thinking and working.
It's actually an interesting exercise sometimes to go out into the organization and find where all the people with digital skills are residing, because you'll find some in marketing, you'll find some in technology or in IT, and then you get into this discussion about what is the definition of digital, which was a question before. And I think you run into the question of how do you sort of create a center of excellence or create excellence around digital and start inculcating these capabilities into the organization, but not ring fencing it and creating just one place where it's sort of a silo. So it's a bit of a trade-off that funds are making these days.
And there's questions coming through which are, really on the level of which part of this do you attack first? The level of technology of our members ranges dramatically, and that it's hard to create apps or sites that all members will enjoy and use. So how do you avoid sort of taking it to the lowest common denominator and dumbing it down to the point where it sort of becomes redundant?
You kind of have to map it. You have to know that you are going to have different groups. But basically, you've got to assume that people are a lot more educated about this than you think, and if you actually provide the products, they will very quickly find them and come. I mean, there was Alan Kohler with his Eureka report was a great example. He launched a product that included quite a bit of superannuation for people over 55, I think 15 years ago, and everyone said, but they're not even on digital. And of course, that was proved absolutely wrong.
And this was his newsletter, if you will.
Yes.
So this is the content that you're speaking about.
Pretty much.
Why am I engaging with super? I'm not, it's out there, I'm doing my thing, it's doing its thing. But if you have that link of content between us and them, in the same way that Booper's Blue Room talks about how to correctly fit a mouthguard, suddenly I'm engaging with my...
Absolutely. In fact, in all the digital publications that I've worked with, superannuation was the most sought after topic. In fact, we used to say, God, the readers are a bit low, can we do a story on super?
Can I promise you that from a media perspective, if you do a story on well-fitting bras, that does very well. Asthma, They all will listen to a story on asthma and superannuation.
Super.
The phones will melt down if you do those three things. Probably not together.
Yeah. I was going to say we can't comment on the first two. But
Yes, that's right. Particularly you, Chuck, are a bit at sea.
Yeah. No, it's huge, fantastic opportunity.
And so is that what you're talking about when you talk about content, Rocky? I mean, telling me that I've spent 20% of my income, what I've put in the bank on root canal this year, is not useful information to me.
That's right. What people value is a relationship, and again, what the research that I'm doing at the moment is clearly showing is that the way people think about their personal priorities and finance are inextricably linked. And when it comes to looking at what kind of relationship they want with their financial institutions that they're not getting today, it's because it's quite transactional. It's quite descriptive. But they want financial institutions to play a greater role in helping them do the 4 core needs, which haven't changed. Despite all of the disruption that you hear about and read about, the 4 core needs of what people want from finance have not changed. That is to save, spend, borrow and invest. It's the way with which people want those things and the services to customised to them is what's changing.
Where does the regulator come into this? Isn't there an issue with regulation with how creative you can be in this area in terms of providing content for people and communicating to them?
Well, look,
Please.
yeah, look, everybody knows the rules on this, and that's part of what you teach people. This is what you can and you can't say, and for very good reasons. So, there's a lot of great information out there that you can give people, certainly without breaking any regulations.
I think there's an interesting debate that is probably just starting around data and who owns it and what the appropriate uses for it are. And so today we think as a fund or as a bank or as any institution, our customers' data, we should look at it and understand them better, and I think that's the right path, and we're adding the contextual data from channels and behavioral data and creating a fuller picture to do things that are better than what you're seeing from your bank. But then there's the question of, okay, well, fintechs are coming along and they're asking, well, if you sign up and you give us permission, we're going to go get your data from everywhere, and we're going to create this really interesting experience. And then it becomes this sort of question of, if a member kind of asks us to release their data to someone else, do we do that? And who really owns the data? So I think the sovereignty of data will become a question, and I think there's a broader view of the government saying, okay, or regulatory bodies saying, what are our policies for how data can be exchanged, shared, used, all those sorts of things, and really who owns it and who should be able to benefit from it.
That's interesting, because that's the intersection of regulation and trust, isn't it, Rocky? I mean, do I want Ian Silk to approach me and say, well, I need to understand the whole picture, so give me access to your NAB information? First of all, do I want that? Am I likely to give it to him, given the level of trust that most people have in their superannuation fund? And then, given the regulatory boundaries, what can Aussie Super realistically do with that information that's useful to me?
Yeah, look, a couple of things around regulation. I think the mood of regulators globally is to foster innovation, and I think the UK is probably one of the leading jurisdictions that's really opened up the opportunities for innovation, and the regulators are setting up structures to accommodate that. So the regulator is not regulation is not somewhere that we should be looking for some form of protection. Their prime motivation at the moment is to foster innovation and creativity, but to do it in a controlled manner where the protections of the consumer are still there. Now, data protection is one of the single biggest issues facing any organisation, doesn't matter who you are, today, and the value of your information assets has now become the primary motive of why industrialised cybercrime is going to have a go at your organisation. Now, you've seen lots of examples of what happens when customer data has been compromised, and we saw that most visibly in the recent Madison site in the US.
Yeah, right.
And look at the flow-on effects and the dilemma that that board was presented with, because that board was held to ransom to basically say, change your constitution or we're going to publish your customers' personal data. And so where I think there's probably going to be a lot more focus from a regulatory perspective is around data. Mandatory data breach notification legislation is up before lawmakers worldwide. It's up before our lawmakers as well. No one has now or is now debating the merits of whether that should or shouldn't exist. They're now debating what are the triggers for when those need to be invoked. The issue with that is that, as I mentioned before, when it comes to trust, the second most important attribute of trust when it comes to financial services is keep my personal financial information secure. And so the reputation of your organisations is what's at risk.
There's a question on the screen about thoughts on the blend of digital and personal or face-to-face advice.
So my view on that would be that the kinds of decisions that people are making when it comes to their financial plan, their retirement, those important sort of forward-looking decisions, robo-advice and digital elements can play a part in that, but the humanistic elements, I don't believe will go away. And there is a really important role for a face-to-face or a conversation with an advisor that someone who's seen it before can recognize the patterns, can recognize the situations, can make someone feel comfortable, can make a member feel comfortable that they've got the right plan, that they've got the right target and the right sort of behaviors going to meet their financial needs. I think the trick of digital is how you make those advisors able to have more interactions, create more plans, how you leverage the advisor to get to more members through those digital elements. And part of that is, as an example, if you have a holistic advice conversation, you have a plan, how do you then represent that through the digital experience so that over time the conversation doesn't sort of float away into the ether and someone forgets it? They're tracking against a plan that's represented in their mobile or digital experience that says I'm tracking towards my goals or I'm not.
And interestingly, you know, Melody Hobson was talking in the initial plenary about to what extent people need to be focused on the long-term goals of long-term savings, and that she actually had anxious clients, you know, in the years after the global financial crisis who wanted a monthly update on where their retirement savings and their investments were. And she said, no, I have nothing to say to you every month. I will speak to you every quarter, but I have nothing to say to you every month, which is quite a brave thing to say to somebody who's investing a lot of money with you. So the question on the screen is, to that point, as an industry we're historically very poor at handling members' tech, as tech is inevitably rolled out, how do we keep super as a long-term goal instead of a daily balance check? And I remember in the heady days of the Clinton administration working in the United States with people checking their 401 3 times a day. And you're kind of thinking, you're 35. You know.
Yeah, look, just a couple of thoughts around this. I'll just begin by just saying there is something fundamentally wrong with financial advice in Australia. And if you look at the numbers speak for themselves. Of the 9 million people aged between 20 years and 50 years, only 3 million of those are taking or getting professional financial advice today. That is 6 million people in the prime of their lives, contributing extensively to the economic development of our nation, do not get professional financial advice. Now, you can't keep throwing the same value proposition of advice at that 6 million expecting to get a different response. They've already voted. And this is where I think the industry is shifting onto digital advice and shifting onto scaled advice, that is just advice purely targeted towards a particular category, may in fact, I think, unlock some of the opportunities, you know, when it comes to advice, you know, in that area. But this is a big issue, but it's also a huge opportunity. There's not too many markets that you can look at and sort of say there's a market of 6 million people.
Well, so what do you say? You're going to send me an
around.
email saying most 48-year-old women with bad teeth have more retirement savings than you do. I mean, is that the sort of communication that might attract more attention?
Well, the other side of this is look at the explosiveness of self-managed super funds.
Yeah.
Self-managed super funds, with the greatest of respect, wasn't an initiative that was developed and then widely promoted by the industry. This was pulled by groups of people who had a fundamental belief that they could do things better than what their fund provider is doing today, and some of the numbers indicate that they're right.
And therefore what?
And they're wrong too. I
Yeah.
mean, many of them are finding it's an expensive mistake. But, you know, look, I think a great thing to ever do is to sit down and actually say, well, with our customer at the middle, let's pretend we're starting a company from afresh and map what a digital journey would look like. And then look at what would we want to, you know, do digitally, and what would we still want to do, back to talking to Chuck before, face-to-face, and what can we do socially, and then how does mobile all fit in? And that's not a hard thing to do, and it's a really fun exercise.
And Chuck, can you justify that to the question on the screen against the sole purpose test, that sort of significant investment?
Well, I think against the broad perspective of we're picking up members' financial future, we're trying to get them to the best outcome in terms of their retirement and long-term goals. I think when you look at how behavioral economics and the kinds of changes in behavior you can get as a result of better engagement, I think you can say, okay, yes, we are meeting our duty to members by investing in these kinds of initiatives, right? Because we're able to put in programs in place that the default option is to, let's say, invest more or invest in a certain way, or not sabotage ourselves when the market is volatile and trading at a point when we shouldn't be, right? So some of those lessons, I think they come from seeing how actually people behave when it's not the first thing on their minds, when you're trying to get more engagement, when you're trying to bump it up as a priority now versus later. And so I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that, and a justification for the investment.
A few quick questions. There's one on the screen, perhaps Rocky, for you. What should boards be asking when signing off on large digital projects?
Well, biased question is, are you buying from Telstra? No, I think the question that they should be asking is, what difference is that going to make to the customer or to your member? But to truly understand that from the customer's perspective, from the user perspective, it's so easy to unnecessarily get lost in technology, but to put yourself into your members' and your customers' shoes and to understand what it is they're going to experience as a result of that, I think is the single most important question.
Yes. Look, actually, putting yourself in the customer's shoes and not being afraid to just ask, well, what do you mean by that? Well, how would it work? I mean, all these CEOs and board directors are very intelligent, and it's just not being afraid to ask those incredibly obvious questions. Being a journalist, I'm never afraid of it. Ellen, you would know this.
I don't understand, tell me
Great
again.
skill, yeah. What do you mean? Walk me through it again. And then not being afraid again to ask more and more.
Yeah, I agree. The issue that sometimes we run into with digital and technology projects at a sort of broader level is it's hard to know when this is it, right?
Yeah.
So we get into an incrementalism of asking for more money to build more things. And so when you get into the target state conversation, that helps to say, we're trying to achieve this, and to get there, we need X, Y, and Z projects which require this funding. But a lot of times you end up not being able to do that, right? And going with, well, we need to replace some of the core or build the data warehouse. And then the ask after the data warehouse or midway through the data warehouse is, now we need all the digital elements on top of it. Or actually we found that the data's not right, so we need to remediate it, or we need to replace the core. And so you end up with this incremental set of investments. And so from a board member's perspective, you're looking at, what am I spending? What's the risk level that I'm incurring as I go through that arc of a transformation? And then what's the uplift in member benefit over time?
Wow.
And so when you think about those lines and how they're moving across time, you sort of say, okay, well, if you framed it out for me like that at the beginning, I might not have done it, right? So you kind of try to give the most fulsome picture of what the journey looks like, so everyone goes in with their eyes open about what the economics will look like and what the benefits will look like.
And with 30 seconds left, everyone take 30 seconds. Any last words of advice when you go back to work on Monday? Where to start?
Start with the mobile first.
Yes, train your executives in social.
Make them sign up to Twitter and Instagram and
Make them absolutely open up to this whole new collaborative, cooperative world.
take a selfie. All right.
No, not taking.
Hard to distill down to one, but in 8 seconds, I would focus on building the right culture and capabilities that'll sustain you for the long term.
All right, wonderful advice from our panellists. Please thank the three of them very much.